When we watch the movie Training Day, we think of Alonzo Harris, masterfully portrayed by Denzel Washington, as an anomaly. Alonzo Harris is the quintessential bad cop. The cop who beats, kills, and steals with impunity, who doesn't care about truth or ethics but securing a conviction by any means necessary. What we don't get just from the movie is what Alonzo does is normal. When you watch him threatening and intimidating people, pointing guns at people for minor infractions, stealing money for drug dealers, and so on, you're seeing all cops.
To protect the sheep, you gotta catch the wolf. And it takes a wolf to catch a wolf, you understand?
Alonzo says, as a narcotics officer, you've got to be a wolf, or else you're a sheep, and the other wolves will kill you and the innocent. That's how a police officer, and in fact anyone with power, needs to think to believe that they're necessary. The world is divided into wolves and sheep, and you have to be a wolf to protect the sheep from other wolves. That's how power justifies itself, protecting the weak from the evil. What the holders of power never acknowledge is the extent to which the problems they purport to solve are their fault. The police enforce the law, which means whatever commands the state lays down, the police are the ones who threaten you with violence if you don't follow them. And by my reckoning, that makes them responsible for the disastrous results that ensue. Over time, policing has enforced colonialism, slavery, apartheid, and white supremacy, conscription, strike-breaking, turned peaceful protests violent, taken people's money, taken their homes, and even taken their kids. That's what it means to enforce the law. Today, police derive virtually unlimited power from the criminalization of drugs.
It grants them the authority to stop and harass people, search their cars, homes, and luggage, steal their money, and throw them in cages.
And since drugs are illegal everywhere, cops all over the world claim the right to stop and search you if they say they suspect you have drugs. However, policing a market does not destroy it. As a result of criminalization, drugs are lucrative, an estimated 2/3 of the revenue of organized crime worldwide. The only people capable of supplying more than a little of anything illegal are clandestine international organizations who will fight back if necessary. They create local dealers, and local dealers need guns. Black and brown people have always been the main targets of policing in the US, so it's no surprise that all the wolves the police tell us they need to stop from preying on the sheep are black and Latino. Cops declare war on gangs, gangs resist. It's a never-ending cycle of violence that only ends when drugs are legalized. People see this cycle as good versus evil, when it's an inevitable result of the war on drugs. These supposedly bad people who need to be in prison wouldn't need to defend their business with violence and would not have brought violence into their communities if the state hadn't created such a lucrative market. They do what needs to be done to survive, and like everyone else, they want more than the bare minimum. Many police and policymakers are well aware of the enormous harm their policies cause and the futility of trying to destroy the supply of illegal drugs, but why would they stop? People don't willingly relinquish their power. The character of Alonzo Harris was based on Rafael Perez, a former member of the LAPD. Alonzo's license plate is a reference to him, Officer Rafael Perez, born 1967. Perez was assigned to Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums, or CRASH, an anti-gang unit. The CRASH program was ended in 2000 following Perez's arrest and testimony. To save himself, Perez ended up blowing the whistle on CRASH. The unlimited power it afforded associated officers had led them to engage in all kinds of crimes like stealing and selling drugs, shooting and beating without provocation, and covering it all up. Perez claimed 90% of the cops in his unit framed witnesses, planted drugs and guns on suspects, and lied about it in court to get a conviction.
I didn't shoot him. A room full of cops said you did.
He said cops would frame people and come up with alibis for each other. Perez made a killing off the illegal drug trade. What they eventually caught him for was swiping cocaine out of the evidence locker and selling it, making maybe $1 million for himself that way. Why would he, or any other police who do the same thing, want to get drugs off the streets? The job of police is violence and control in the name of the state, which, as a corollary, enables them to make bank on the side. A bunch of the officers in Crash moonlighted as bodyguards for rappers at Death Row Records, like Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, and were probably involved in the murder of the notorious B.I.G. One of them, David Mack, robbed a bank. Remember this part of the movie?
You remember that fool in the wheelchair? How you think he got there?
Alonzo put Snoop's character in a wheelchair and got away with it because Snoop Dogg sold drugs. That part of the movie may also have been based on real life. Perez and his partner shot and paralyzed a gang member named Javier Ovando while they were on stakeout. They got him sent to prison for 23 years for assaulting them when he hadn't. Fortunately, Ovando's sentence was overturned when Perez confessed everything, as were the cases of over 100 other people Perez had falsely accused.
Judges have handed out over 15,000 man-years of incarceration time based on my investigations, okay? My record speaks for itself.
We're taught to think of cops like Alonzo or Raphael as the bad cops that the system somehow filters out, or at least could filter out if it was motivated to. They would get told they're abusing their power. But any use of power is abusive. Using power means laying down laws that benefit you and punishing people who don't comply. Threatening, beating, throwing people in cages, killing when they decide it's necessary, that's normal police behavior. Immunity from punishment for doing things that would get civilians arrested is also standard for agents of the state. None of their fellow cops, their bosses, judges, politicians, or any of the anti-corruption internal inquiry task forces could care less about what police do with their power until they have no choice but to acknowledge it and distance themselves from it. In effect, they encourage everything the police do. Calling it the abuse of power would imply this wasn't how power was supposed to work. People who believe in police believe that authority, in whatever form it takes, deserves to have power over everyone. But that power should somehow be constrained by the same people who benefit from it. It's like giving your 16-year-old the keys to your Lambo, but saying, now you can only drive it under 20 in an empty parking lot. Police stations in the US don't keep consistent records of complaints of misconduct, but there are databases you can access, which I link to in the description. The records that exist show over 200,000 reports of misconduct, one for every 4 officers in the US, 23,000 of which were for excessive force, 3,000 allegations of rape, sexual assault, and child molestation, 3,000 cases of theft, 2,000 cases of domestic violence, 2,000 cases of perjury or other forms of deception to secure a conviction. Police in the US have killed over 3,000 people since the beginning of 2020. Violence against Black and Indigenous people is more prevalent, more severe, and easier to get away with than violence against whites. And let's remember, of course, a lot of the people won't report these things out of fear or just knowing it's futile. Many of the officers fired or placed on leave get reinstated, which tells other officers punishment for them will just be a slap on the wrist, and so it encourages more such misconduct. So file your reports if you like. It won't make the police any nicer. I could also bring up civil asset forfeiture, when police steal money and property from people because they claim it was used in connection with drugs, which in 2014 was estimated at $4.5 billion stolen from taxpayers at gunpoint. But it's legal, so maybe it doesn't belong here. 80% of its victims aren't even charged with a crime. What Alonzo does in this scene would probably be protected by the courts. It's easy to say Alonzo is a corrupt cop, but the problem is, it implies there's another kind of cop, incorruptible, who would never break the law or their ethics in the pursuit of justice, who would report their colleagues who were corrupt. Does that happen? Are there cops like that? Cops tend to feel it's against their interest and loyalties to report misconduct. According to copcrisis.com, 43% agree with the statement, always following the rules is not compatible with getting the job done. 52% say it's not unusual for a police officer to turn a blind eye to the improper conduct of other officers. 61% say they do not always report serious abuse by fellow officers, and 84% said they witnessed fellow officers using more force than necessary. But some cops have consciences. What happens to the cops who report the Alonzo Harrises? They get fired, or worse. Feel free to Google any of these names on this old meme, and bear in mind it keeps happening. In the smoke this weed scene, Alonzo embodies the charming facade a cop will put on until it's time to play the violence card. When you first watch the scene, it seems like he's just trying to teach Jake a lesson, but with hindsight we know Alonzo needed Jake to have drugs in his system, so he intimidated and threatened him into smoking it. Cops will smile at you, pretend to confide in you, coax you, but they know at root they have the final say, because at any time, the gun can come out. If you've ever seen the 80s movie Colors, on more or less the same topic as Training Day, you might remember this scene.
Well, these two bulls are sitting on a grassy knoll overlooking a herd of Guernseys. And the baby bull says, "Hey, Pop, let's run down and fuck one of those cows." But the papa bull says, "No, son. Let's walk down. Fuck them all."
The most successful cops know people. They know the area. They have informants. They blackmail people because their threats of punishment are credible.
Give me a name. That's 4. Give me a name. That's 30 years. You want to go to jail, you want to go home.
And they collect evidence to use against people. They intimidate with their very demeanor and terrorize people when it suits them. It's not violence that scares people, remember, it's the threat of violence. Fear is where police get their power from. Alonzo's not a bad cop. He's what cops aspire to be. Even as he's facing death, Alonzo says,
"Shit, you can shoot me, but you can't kill me."
Because he's all cops. You could stop one cop, but there are others. They're extremely organized. Alonzo breaks the law, but it's okay to break the law if you're the police. In fact, despite getting his authority from it, Alonzo doesn't seem to care about the law.
Yeah, give him credit though. Shit, he worked the system. Deserves his freedom. Huh?
He robs people, but it's okay to rob people if they sell drugs. Rafael Perez and his crew used to carry around bags of guns to plant on gang members, and then lie about it in court. It's okay though, they would reason. They're the bad guys, and we're the good guys. The good guys can do anything, because as long as they have their badges, they're still the good guys. They're enforcers for a system that calls itself the justice system. So anything they do is in the pursuit of justice. plus whatever little on the side they obviously deserve for being so important. Perez said as much in his testimony that the end justifies the means.
The atrocities that were committed by myself and those who stand accused are unforgivable acts. The lines between right and wrong became fuzzy and indistinct. The us against them ethos of the overzealous cop began to consume me. And the ends seemed to justify the means. I only vaguely sensed that we were doing the wrong thing for the right reasons.
I can't help wondering how many other cops would agree. The victims of Perez's unit would say they'd been set up, the gun had been planted, but whose testimony are the courts more likely to believe? The guy accused of being in a gang and selling drugs, or the guy with the badge? All the people Perez falsely accused were found guilty. The word corruption shouldn't refer to the normal, albeit illegal, things that a high-ranking officer does. It should refer to the process by which a person's conscience is sacrificed repeatedly on the altars of self-interest, pragmatism, and following orders, and they become a shell of their former selves. Alonzo's not unusual. He's not evil, at least not in any way that the rest of us wouldn't be given the same amount of power. We know he used to have a conscience, like Jake, because Roger says so, but that changed. Some people go into the police with a thirst for bullying people and using them for target practice, but others, like Alonzo, just become that way. This former member of Crash says he grew up around gangs and hated bullies and how they would prey on the weak, the sheep. He wanted to make things safer for people, but he didn't realize he was just joining the biggest gang with the most power that uses the most violence. Police know they rarely get held accountable.
You're a virgin shooter above suspicion.
Alonzo calls killing someone popping your cherry, to imply it's something all cops go through at some point. Humans are great at explaining away our questionable choices.
You did what you had to do, right? You did what you had to do.
Sorry, orders is orders, dog.
It can't be like this.
It is this way, man. I'm sorry I exposed you to it, but it is. It's ugly, but it's necessary.
And if you excuse yourself enough, before you know it, nothing you do bothers you. But most people's failings are sometimes being an asshole, not regularly beating, killing, and caging people.
I had already been broken in by the department, trained by the unit. When I was in the crash unit, I started being introduced to certain illegal activity. Because of those little steps I took, it led me to doing bigger stuff, not feeling it, not having a conviction. My conscience was so darkened that I didn't have a conscience anymore.
Cops like these feel nothing for their victims until they're forced to confront what they've done. Otherwise, they keep getting more comfortable with violence and theft. Was Alonzo sadistic before? When did he first kill someone? How long until it became normal? We know he beat a guy to death in Las Vegas, and he probably did so because he figured he could get away with it.
I cheated on my wife, I cheated on my employer, and I cheated on all of you, the people of Los Angeles.
Having killed and beaten and caged probably hundreds of people for doing the same things he was doing, and lied about it and got rich in the process, Perez now feels bad. Well, feeling bad won't bring people back to life, or give people back the years you stole from them by throwing them in jail, or give Javier Ovando back the use of his legs. Nor will it give taxpayers back the $1.8 billion paid out in settlements to victims of the police. We could, however, prevent these things from ever happening again, but that would require abolishing the police. Like many people with power, Alonzo justifies himself by saying how good he is for his subjects. But like when he charmingly coaxes Jake to smoke weed laced with PCP, the people he rules know the gun can come out at any time.
All right,
I'm putting cases on all you bitches. Huh?
The locals have to speak to Alonzo respectfully, but behind his back, they hate him.
Man, I'm sick of this shit, man. Can't stand that motherfucker.
Power's not about benefiting the people you supposedly protect, but benefiting yourself. If you just wanted to protect and help people, you wouldn't need power over them. You could just offer your services and they could tell you what they needed. But then they would no longer fear you, or be dependent on you, or be forced to give you some kind of tribute. People with power tell themselves their subjects need to be ruled over. They might condescendingly divide the ruled into wolves and sheep because they're just animals to the ruler. We see in various parts of the film the contempt this seasoned cop has for the people.
Oh, just let the animals wipe themselves out.
God willing.
But none more so than his speech at the end.
You disloyal, fool-ass, bitch-made punk.
They're disloyal for not accepting his power over them. He feels entitled to rule them and to threaten them with the law because he has a badge and authority. We're supposed to think of Jake as the opposite of Alonzo in every way. He's inexperienced, naive, uncorrupted. But those are pretty much the only differences. Why is Jake a cop?
Why do you want to be a narc?
I want to serve my community by ridding it of dangerous drugs.
Right. Well, why you want to be a narc?
I want to make detective.
There you go.
Jake plans to be just like Alonzo one day, and for the same reasons. He wants to impose his justice on communities he doesn't belong to. Like all cops. Jake goes pretty far before he stops following orders. He knows he's going to be using violence.
We're an aggressive unit.
I know, sir. That's why I signed up.
He pledges himself to Alonzo like Anakin to the Emperor.
I will do anything you want me to do.
He sticks guns in people's faces when he knows they're harmless.
Hey, control your suspect.
Miss, palms on the glass.
He turfs a guy out of a wheelchair on suspicion. He repeatedly breaks the law and repeatedly suppresses his conscience and continues to follow orders. Jake does most of the things Alonzo does except laugh about it. He might shake his head a bit, but he stands by and watches everything Alonzo does that we would object to, right up until Alonzo kills a guy. Unfortunately, at the end of the movie, Jake still hasn't shattered his beliefs.
That's right. Come on, Jake.
You don't deserve this.
If he doesn't deserve it, who does? Jake, because of his good intentions? Weren't you listening?
But you gotta change him from the inside, son.
Change it from the inside, which is what aspiring cops, soldiers, and bureaucrats get told as soon as they realize how the system actually works. Jake represents the good intentions beginner cops have before they realize what policing actually is. They have to believe, at least until they become one of us, that there's a way to make things better. Once you get experience like Alonzo, you either become like him, or you spend your whole career not caring and pretending it all isn't happening. You push it down and become numb.
You start becoming real callous and tough. You start suppressing everything, and you don't have emotion no more. You don't feel nothing. You don't have any compassion for a human being that just got shot or he got his head blown off. You don't have that compassion anymore. You can become like a numb robot.
Police are just the enforcement arm of a much bigger system of violence we call the state. We don't see many other aspects of the state in Training Day, but we're reminded at the end that the system we live under supports the police whatever they do. The news reports of Alonzo's death treat him like they do all cops. They don't report anything he did. Instead, they say he was a highly decorated officer and 13-year veteran of the LAPD who died serving a high-risk warrant. Sounds like a hero. There are a million Alonzo Harrises. Why do they deserve power over us? Why do they get to rob and kill people and their authority never gets questioned? Why do we accept a system for concentrating power as normal? Why do we honor the people who think of us as sheep? Training Day is one more argument for abolition. Thanks.